Outer Orange.
Привет всем. Now I'm going to ask you what kind of crack-induced person said that drawing like 4 to 6 cards a turn was okay, because that's basically what Ballista is, what we're going to talk about today. You have a deck that basically says pot of greed every single turn and then some, and somehow it's still not the most broken deck in the world because it's Vanguard and it's standard format. Today we're going to be going over Ballista and why she is a really strong deck. So today we will talk about strength of deck because Orange says so. So we're gonna just basically kind of break down some subtopics here, just kind of get into it. The basic concept of the deck is you draw a lot and you can restand your rear guards and you gain numbers. And why in the world does all of that stuff matters? Well, it matters for a couple of reasons. We're gonna start with probably the basic one and the most obvious one, and that's the concept of seeing more of your deck. Ballista draws so much that you see so much of your deck. It's really hard to sit there and go, oops, I bricked, because you're gonna see a lot of your deck. You're gonna see a lot of your deck early on. You're gonna see a lot of your late game. Sometimes one-ofs that you don't think you'll see them. You'll see a lot of your pieces, so because you'll see a lot of your pieces, chances are you'll be able to keep going. And then this concept actually falls into the other part of Ballista's skill, which actually has an ability that says get top 5. Looking at top 5 may sound like such a minor thing, but when you're drawing through your deck a lot and you kind of already seen a good bit of your deck, you'll usually actually know what your top 5 may or may not look like. And that's super important because you can activate outpost abilities, you can stack some stuff, you can amplify the strength of the deck, you can always have a board, which Lyrical as a nation always struggles with board. Lyrical is not the best with retire. They don't really handle it very well, and being able to call 2 cards every single turn is very massive as it keeps the engine going, keeps the restanding going, lets you see more of your deck. Now, another thing the deck has is actually a thing called magic numbers. It's not always perfect, but usually you'll be swinging in these perfect intervals of like 28, 33, 38, 48, sometimes 46 will fall through, and that's huge. And the biggest thing is that Vanguard is also huge. Vanguard usually be like 41, 51, 53, something in like that kind of realm, and that's also huge. Your opponent has to sit there and go, okay, this is a 5 attack deck, and Vanguard is basically a PG or die. You can never actually guard the Vanguard. You usually have to take it or perfect guard it, and that's always really risky because there's also restanders coming. They're deck thinning, which means they can check fronts or crits or whatever. OT can be checked. You know, all this stuff can happen while they're also swinging with a big number, and that's also really massive. Another thing is that it's easier to mulligan. Mulligan is insanely important indeed. Something that I feel so many people underestimate, and one of the few people I see talk about this a lot outside of myself is actually Different Fight. Different Fight brings up mulligan a lot. People really underestimate mulligan and pitching in standard format. It is one of the most skill intensive parts of the game. What your opponent pitches and how you're mulliganing and how you're pitching, basically. The reason being is you're telling your opponent information based off what you're mulliganing and based off what you're discarding when you're riding up between grades. It is so important to understand that concept. Because Ballista sees so much of her deck, it is actually easier to mulligan and pitch because you're going to be drawing late game. Like, you know, you're aware they're gonna be drawing, you're aware they'll be able to get top 5. It's actually easier to just sit there and mulligan. Say the turn 2 in Ballista is actually pretty rough. You have to shove a card to soul, to search a card on top of pitching, and also the on-ride for Ballista has a discard on it. And sometimes you'll be doing this weird thing where you're kind of negging yourself depending on what you're seeing and sort of the synergy of like your deck, especially if you're seeing the cycler, if you're not seeing the cycler. But a lot of the times you're going to be plussing over time, and that's why it's easier to pitch early on. And sometimes you can even give your opponent false information. You'll be pitching like something that looks important, but you're like, it's not that important. I'm just pitching this because I know I'm going to see another one type of thing. And then your opponent kind of keeps that information in their head. So it's kind of like a good way to force your opponent to make bad decisions as well based on what you're pitching. The deck's biggest weakness is not seeing persona. And yes, it does happen, though the deck draws like a pot of greed machine, but sometimes you just sit there and you just don't see persona, because the reason being is it's not that you're searching the deck, you're just drawing through the deck. And that is a big key difference between other decks potentially where they can directly search for pieces. Ballista can search for some pieces, but it's not the pieces you always want. It can directly search gems, and there actually is a card called Trixie that has a top 5 shot for just getting a Ballista out. But outside from that, you're basically just drawing. So if all your Ballistas are kind of stuck at the bottom every single time you're shuffling, or you know, whatever it is that's going on, well, guess what? You're kind of stuck and you can brick. But outside of those situations, you're usually going to be in a really good spot because it's not that likely that you're not going to see persona every single game. And that's why mulligan matters, because maybe you want to be mulliganing for persona, especially if you know you're going to die and all that kind of stuff. Last but not least, something really really want to talk about is surviving random BS. This is my favorite thing in D actually, and why I really like decks that draw early. It's one of my favorite reasons about old Flagberg back when we had the Zorga ride line being just able to draw 2 pitch 1. The reason being is early draw is so massive to deal with random BS your opponent throws at you. If you need to guard in certain locations or do certain stuff, it is so much easier to guard if you see more of your deck early on, because you can make better decisions based off your pitch, but you can also make better decisions in guarding. Guarding early can be very important depending on the situation you're in. And because Ballista is seeing more pieces, you can see more PGs, you can see more triggers, you can just see more stuff to kind of help you survive for the late game. The only downside to this is that sometimes it causes Ballista to deck out. Sometimes you'll survive so long that you're not really killing, but you're also like not really doing much, and sometimes you just deck yourself out. It can happen, you have to be very cautious. Sometimes you have to stop yourself from drawing. It's very risky actually. Yeah, it's just something to keep in mind. But surviving random BS is super important because you just never know. Sometimes PGs carry the format pretty heavily. If you find 3 to 4 perfect guards, you are usually in like a really good spot. And especially early on, just having access to a PG, your opponent might like go first or whatever. They might have some like, you know, pop off turns, might hit the over trigger, whatever. It's good to just have that PG as like a safety net. Like, okay, well, I dropped the PG, I'm fine. I have like another turn to live. I don't have to take too much damage. Having the luxury to find those kind of perfect guards as soon as possible can make or break a game. And that's another thing why I think decks like Dragonic Overlord are still like in meta, or have been in meta for so long. Part of it is because there's a grade 1 that says on Rise search a grade 1. You can search a Blitz Order, you can search a PG, you can search a piece. The fact that you have access to that is pretty huge, unless the opponent denies it, which they can. But unless they deny it, if they don't deny it, you have a direct perfect guard that you can search out basically every single game. And that's honestly, in my opinion, massive. Knowing that I have that safety net of just having a PG every game is huge. But you know, drawing is also another approach, right? If you're just casually drawing through your deck a lot, you have a high chance of seeing PGs. I'm using Fabric example again because I just play the deck a lot. So, but sometimes because you're like early drawing a lot, you're just like seeing PGs just naturally, and you're just saying they're like, it's not a piece, but it helps me survive. But that's basically it. This is just like minor stuff I just kind of wanted to really right away talk about. I know it's like not everything. There's also just a bunch of like little stuff about how to play the deck to kind of showcase it, but just something. But I try to keep it generic, just like typical stuff that like that makes decks strong. And Ballista just has a lot of them. There are some people out there that like think Ballista's not that good. I just kind of sit there and go like, huh? Ballista is actually insanely good. It does have counterplay. There is counterplay, so it's not tier 0 deck or anything like that, but it's a very strong contender. It definitely does a lot that a lot of decks either can't do or can't keep up. I will say there are some trigger variants, and I just think D in general is kind of going through this weird trigger variance right now. That for some reason triggers can just carry a game so hard, even when you're like not really doing too much, and it makes some games feel awful. And I'm not trying to like be all like negative Nancy here, but it's just something I've recently been noticing, both in testing, competing, whatever, that I can not check triggers and have full combos and just lose, and then I could check triggers, be bricking, and I'm winning for some reason, and it makes absolutely no sense to me right now. It's one of those things about D that I'm like, well, what happened? It didn't feel like this before. On a scale of how a deck functions, just like pure functions, none of the extra like RNG stuff, Ballista has a lot going for it, and the downsides are pretty minor in comparison to all the good stuff it has. And I just think that that's what makes the deck so powerful. That's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you find it informative. Tell me your experiences with Ballista, how you feel about it, what do you think in counterplay. I'll give you one right now. I think Prison is insanely good into Ballista. I think Prison is really underrated. Gonna lie, fighting Prison is extremely hard right now. I don't know what to do. It's actually a really hard matchup. Ballista has no counter charge. I'm like tempted to throw counter charge in just because it's like, it's basically a loss if you bump into Prison. Subscribe, comment, do all that kind of fun stuff. Don't forget to shop at 50cards.shop. History Collection is dropping very, very, very soon. We got a couple days left, and I got a lot of exciting stuff coming out for that, on top of other content creators who have exciting stuff coming out for it, and on top of Bushrode, who's also dropping it, and they have exciting stuff coming out for it. So do not forget to check all that out. 50cards.shop, code orange for all your goodies. So yeah, peace out, guys. Das svidania, and I'll see you guys in a future video. Bye!